Today for Ask an Archaeologist, we have Carly. She'll talk about community and public archaeology as well as her digs.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Carlin Stewart. I recognize almost all of the faces on this chat today. So some of you know me from my time interning with Jemez Historic Site and then doing my master's project at Coronado Historic Site on Dig Gisela and then Dig Historia. So now I am coming at you from Los Luceros Historic Site. So really bouncing around these historic sites here. And I am now the Instructional Coordinator here at Los Luceros. And, I just wanted to take a moment and say that I hope that all of you are, staying safe and healthy out there. It's pretty crazy times. And I know that we are all super excited to get back to our sites as soon as we can. So some of you may have heard the Dig Gisela talk that I gave like a year ago, and then some of you might have been at the docent training where I talked about the Dig Historia. So if any of this is repetitive to you, I apologize. But I really wanted to take a second and talk about the importance of public and community archaeology, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now. It's really important to talk about why these things are so important to the discipline. So I'm just going to start with this presentation and just talk to you about some of the important reasons why public archaeology exists, what it is, community archaeology, all that kind of stuff, and then open it up for questions. A lot of archaeologists have very specific interests, so we can have interests in specific material types, right? You could be like a ceramicist or a lithicist. You can study animal bones and be a zooarchaeologist. All of this stuff I'm sure you guys know. I would consider myself more of a generalist. I kind of like a little bit of everything. Must admit, ceramics are not my favorite, so I am so thankful that you guys, a lot of you are such an awesome group of volunteers that can do a lot of that ceramic analysis, so I don't have to. But I would consider myself a generalist, but really where my passion lies is in outreach, is in education, and public and community archaeology. So that's kind of the stance that I come from. And if you don't know my background, I have a bachelor's in anthropology, focused in archaeology from the University of Arizona. And I am finishing up my master's degree in public archaeology from University of New Mexico. And I hope to be graduating in December, and we'll see where the world is at by then, because I'd love to walk across the stage get my diploma, so we'll see. So public and community archaeology at Jemez and Coronado Historic Sites. Again, I'm Carly, Instructional Coordinator at Los Luceros Historic Site. The first question, of course, is what is public archaeology? As our amazing volunteers and friends members, you guys should probably know what public archaeology is already because you do it. You are the ones out there on the ground teaching people what is going on. But there's a lot of different aspects to public archaeology, which this really nice, helpful graphic explains a bit. So we have archaeologists working with the public. So community archaeology, archaeological projects run by museums with the public involved, all those kind of things is archaeologists working with the public. And then we have working by the public. So we have public interest groups, archaeological societies, metal detecting groups, amateur interest groups, and independent scholars. And then we have public sector archaeology. So that's like cultural resources management. So it's the private sector. There's private companies that are adhering to federal laws and making sure that those laws are adhered to. Education, so public archaeology can take the form of education in schools and museums, online. And then we have popular archaeology, right? So we have Indiana Jones and kind of Laura Croft a little bit, and all of these other ways that archaeology can be accessed by the public via popular outlets. And so the definition with all of that craziness that I prefer to use is really simple. Dun, 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 dun. Practice and scholarship where archaeology meets the world. So it's really just when we meet everybody else, that is public archaeology. And that is the definition that I like to use. So what is the goal of archaeology? It is to make archaeology accessible to the public in engaging ways that inspire meaningful connections to people and places of the past. It's kind of a longer definition or a longer goal, but really accessibility is so important on archaeology, and we'll kind of talk about why and what that means and what we can do to help it. Why do people need to connect to archaeology? Because these connections help people understand the value and importance of protecting archaeological sites. And, that may lead people to complete action items. Voting, super important. Donating to archaeological projects or museums, historic sites, all that kind of stuff. Advocation, huge thing. Archaeology, I hate to tell you this, is not apolitical. Archaeology is a very political discipline, and it's really important that we do advocate for the people, not only the archaeological sites, but the people that care about these sites as well. People volunteering, such as yourselves, incredibly important, could not do it without you. Our volunteers are incredibly important. Even just getting people to visit archaeological sites so that they have the knowledge, they have the experience, they can walk through the capilla and the hacienda here and, walk through the pueblos and really get to experience that and understand and connect that to people of the past. And not only that, they can spread the word, right? We want other people to join our little gang of ours and supporting all of these initiatives. But not only is it about what, you or what the public can do for archaeology, but it's also what archaeology can do for people. It can encourage self-realizations, it can enrich people's lives, stimulate reflection and creativity. So it's also, archaeology isn't just about what you guys can do for us in public archaeology, but it really is like how we can impart experience, knowledge, engagement, all of that on people as well. So it's a really big two-way street there. And why is it important? So you guys might have seen this slide before, but this was just a poll that I took at the Society for American Archaeology meeting last year. And I just straight up asked, how many times have you been asked about dinosaurs as an archaeologist? You can see these numbers are pretty astounding. Some people say over 100, 25 times, 10 times. 375 times, right? If people don't even know what archaeology is, how are they going to care enough to protect it? And that's really critical right now, because now there is a deregulation executive order, which basically means that people can go past federal statutes such as the National Historic Preservation Act and NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and can really just overstep those rules to get things done. That puts a lot of archaeological sites at jeopardy. It puts a lot of environmental things at jeopardy. And so, like I said, I don't mean to preach at you. I don't mean this to be some reprimand lecture or anything like that, but archaeology is inherently political, and we have to protect our sites. It is our job as archaeologists, as Friends of Coronado members. That is what we do. That is what we are here for. So when things like this happen, it's important to spread information, to vote against these type of deregulating orders. And this is the official Society for American Archaeology stance on it. They did write a letter. Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about is what exactly is the public? There's two really fundamental ways of seeing the public. You could see it as the deficit model, in which people need education in the correct way to appreciate archaeology. The problems that arise with seeing people as having a deficit in their knowledge is, well, whose idea of correct is it, right? Who chooses the final answer for things? That brings up a lot of questions of authority, of knowledge. There's a lot of dissonance even within groups. That's not really great, and we don't want to, consider all visitors that come to Coronado or Jemez or Los Luceros as inherently wrong or dumb or anything like that. That is not how we want to see the public. We want to see people as coming here to absorb and care about the information that they are about to learn. The solution to kind of not doing that is we are not here to instill appropriate facts. Instead, we want to see it as we are equipping people with a set of tools with which to evaluate different forms of evidence and competing claims. So really what that means is we're not saying like, this is the only way to see things. If you see it any way else, you're wrong. That doesn't help anybody. So instead we have to be like, okay, we're just giving people the tools here. You know, they can make up their own minds, but here is what, here are some lines of evidence, and this is what we think. Especially in archaeology when we don't always know the answer to things, right? I think you guys have probably heard me make this joke before, but I always say, you know, you ask an archaeologist, you ask 3 archaeologists the same questions, you're going to get 5 different answers. So there is, you know, a lot of things that we don't know, which is kind of part of the fun and the excitement. And then you allow them to come to their own conclusions, because honestly, the truth is, people are going to do that anyway. You know, people are going to take the information they know with the experiences that they have had in their lives, and they're going to make their own minds about this. We have the other way of viewing the public as having multiple perspectives. This seeks to really enrich people's lives. It recognizes the importance of agency. So people, what that really means is people can decide and do what they want. But the problem with that, if we go too far, it might be taken the wrong way. Really bad information could be passed. I know that Eldon and I have both had instances where people have said very inappropriate or racist things in our sites. And like, if you know, just say like, oh, people can believe what they want, it can be taken too far, because we still need to advocate. We still need to combat racism. We still need to do all of those things. So the solution here is you kind of use both. You kind of see it as giving them a tool set, but also acknowledging that people are going to believe what they want. And you can use generally agreed upon terms, because we still need to be able to communicate with each other. But we also can recognize, you know, popular archaeology and popular interests do exist. People enjoy them, and so we can see those as existing in place without seeing it as something necessarily that we have to fix all the time. You know, people don't come to our historic sites to just be told that they are wrong. And I think it's just really important that all of us take a second to think about how we see the people that visit our sites. Another thing that public archaeology offers is not everybody in my discipline enjoys dealing with or talking to the public. A lot of people are heavily academic. They really are focused heavily on research, and that's fine. We need that too, right? Archaeology, any discipline, takes all sorts. That's okay. So public archaeology specifically allows people like me who want to do outreach and education the chance to do so. And we do that with a responsible approach to stewardship of archaeology and a tolerant attitude to the diversity of public and its interests. And I am not going to lie to you, sometimes that is incredibly difficult. I have had people come up to the bar and say, you know, like, oh, what about those alien petroglyphs? What can you tell me about those? And all of those stories that you've heard that archaeologists or yourselves have gotten. And sometimes it really is difficult to deal with. But you know, it's just a tactic that you learn over time of tolerance, of understanding. And one way that I personally have learned to deal with that is try and find something positive in what they said. So like if someone's like, oh, archaeology is so neat, the aliens, blah, blah, blah. And then I could just say, you know, like archaeology is really neat. Did you know that these people built this, you know, like take a little bit of positivity from something they say and spin it. And so that is like a skill that I am still learning how to do. This is why public archaeology is so important. Not because people get frustrated at people's suggestions of aliens, gold, dinosaurs, shards instead of sherds, but really because the heart of it is essential to protecting archaeology, and archaeology has so much to offer other people. By the way, this dinosaur is my favorite dinosaur. I do get asked that question a lot. That's also kind of fun, is to have those in your back pocket too. It's like, oh, you're an archaeologist. What's your favorite dinosaur? It's like, well, archaeologists don't study dinosaurs, but my favorite one is that crazy one from Jurassic Park. So then we get to community archaeology, collaborative archaeology, and experiential archaeology, which is all these kind of words that we use in academia to describe what you guys are doing and what you have participated in thus far. Why is community archaeology important? You know, it is a growing trend to be more inclusive in archaeology, because you have to think about the history and the origin of archaeology. We can't just cut that part off and ignore it like it doesn't exist. It is born out of a conflictual past. All kinds of isms, colonialism, racism, sexism, paternalism, people thinking that this stuff is theirs, right? And so that is the truth of archaeology. We can't ignore that happened. Eldon and I were just talking about how in Germany we visited the Bergman Museum, and there was the entire Doors of Babylon there. Like an incredible, amazing site. Should not belong in Germany, right? And I just Googled it, and some of the Babylon building is all over the world. I mean, all over the world in different museums. We have to just acknowledge, that as a part of our past as a discipline in archaeology is this colonialism, is looting, is all of these things. And so finally, archaeology as a discipline is shifting to actually acknowledge that this is part of our past and that we have to do something about it. So we're seeing community archaeology rise as one way to be inclusive, as one way to combat these things. And it is seen as being a transformational paradigm shift. So like the whole discipline, it in an idealized view is changing to be more inclusive. Getting other perspectives on things, getting the indigenous perspective is not seen as just beneficial to archaeology, but actually vital. And getting these multiple perspectives increases our understanding of the past. It gives better representative narratives and interpretations, working towards improving relationships with our stakeholders. And it is all about being reflexive. So turning back on ourselves and asking, how does archaeology affect living people? How do the words we use, how do the stories we tell affect living people? That's always something to keep in the back of your mind when you're giving a tour is, okay, what are these things I'm saying about the people that I'm talking about? And, if those people were here in my audience, would they agree with me? Would they support the word choices that I'm using? An important thing to remember is sometimes you're not going to say the right thing, and you just have to accept that with humility, change your words, change your actions, and just continue to improve, right? Community, that's another word that I like to discuss, because oftentimes you think of community as being this cohesive group of people, right? But is that actually true? We typically think of shared beliefs, experiences, teamwork, unity, shared memories. But we always have to be reflexive. We always have to look back on that. Is that really true? Does that actually exist? Or is there a lot of different opinions that exist within that community? So if you're saying that you're doing community archaeology, are you really working with the whole community? Like all 20,000 people in that group had trials, had a say, they're all digging out there? Probably not. You're probably working with representatives of a community or select community members. How are these people chosen? How did people get involved? Well, the wrong answer is it's easy, whatever, but then you have to look and dissect it, and sometimes the complex answer is the correct one. And then how are you collaborating? What does collaboration mean? And what does working together with other people mean? So this is a spectrum that was developed in archaeology, and I won't get too much into it, but just know that there is, resistance. There is still a lot of people that are against each other, that think that, indigenous views and archaeologists don't agree, or science versus indigenous views. And so these goals of these projects develop in opposition. Then there's participation, where you still have separate goals, but you're a little bit better at working together. And then there's true collaboration. So that is truly goals developed jointly, information flows freely between all the people involved. And that's what we're aiming for with all of this. Finally, we get to talk about the actual case studies. Thank you all so much for hanging on with me through community and public archaeology. I just think all of these things are incredibly important to discuss, especially right now. The Gisoa, that was a huge collaborative effort between New Mexico Historic Site, sorry, there's missing an S, which is, New Mexico Museum Foundation, Friends of Coronado, Jemez Pueblo, UNM students, Forest Service, and National Park Service archaeologists were out there, school groups, TV show representatives, and the general public got to help with this project. So that's a lot of opinions and a lot of different views to throw into this one space. But I think that it was, an incredibly enriching experience for everyone involved. And I think any of you that had helped on that project would agree. These slides were written and developed by Ethan Ortega and Matt Barber, and I gave this lecture about a year ago. The reason that this specific project took place at Jemez was because it had been over 50 years since the last major excavations occurred at the village of Kuaua, which is a long time. And so the beginning of this excavation, I actually was not a part of. I was just leaving my hometown of Tucson, moving to Albuquerque to start my master's, and I kind of jumped in halfway through this project. But the beginning of this excavation began with 3 test units to try and find the walls of the room. And then once a corner was found, you guys all traced out the walls to find the extent of the room. And shocker! The room was much bigger than anticipated. Once it was fully exposed, it was 30% larger than the other rooms in the part of the village, which is bananas because 1, it's unexpected, and 2, with timing and people and all of that, the excavation ended up running into the spring, which was great for me because then I got to help more. And it really produced an incredible amount of information, of artifacts, and all of that. And so once excavated from the local community participated in the project, and each day there was a Jemez tribal member present for the dig, which is such a vital part of this community archaeology. We were excavating a Jemez Pueblo, and there were Jemez people there. And that is really the direction that I see archaeology going in. I think that people will come trained to excavate their own history. And then once the excavation was completed, the floor of the room was more than 2 meters beneath the surface. And there's a picture of me excavating that corner. So it's pretty deep, pretty far down there. And, if this was the full lecture on Dig Kuaua, I could tell you all the different layers and stuff like that. But I think that Matt can definitely answer any of those questions that you have about the excavation. Or I could always give that talk later. We're just focusing on the community aspect during this presentation. So artifacts that were recovered were taken into the museum exhibit, which acted as a field laboratory. Visitors could see the objects cleaned and cataloged. And maybe this kind of seemed to volunteers like, oh, of course, like this makes sense. We're just going to take it inside to clean. But honestly, this stuff always in archaeology, almost always happens behind the scenes in very particular places with particular people, and not everybody gets to see this. So the fact that we had volunteers working on this, but also the public could watch it, could ask questions, could see things come straight out of the ground onto a table in the museum is really such a vital part of this project. It really is, again, about that inclusivity and people feeling like they are a part of this project. They were cleaned, cataloged, and left on display for visitors to see. That was another cool thing is you could, visitors, if they came back, they could see how the excavation is progressing, not only in the ground, but also the artifacts that had come out of it, which is neat. And so here are some of my favorite pictures from that project getting on the right there, you can see a family of kids involved. The kids really love picking things out of the screen, and that is such an incredible part because they just get so excited when they find, obsidian. They're like, "What is this? This is so awesome!" And it's just little moments like that affect people, that change their minds, that make them make a memory that connects to archaeology. So if those kids walked away knowing that archaeologists excavate things that have to do with people and not dinosaurs, I'd call it a win. So here are some of the artifacts that came out of the ground from that excavation. We have a lot of ceramic material here, and upper right is an axe head. We have a projectile point. We have ceramics. We have part of a necklace thing. What is that word? Pendant. Yes. Thank you, Weldon. Part of a pendant. And honestly, I think my favorite thing that came out of the ground was that woven mat that was an incredible find for me as an archaeologist, because I did most of my work in southern Arizona in the heat, where any kind of organic material really just didn't exist out there. But here, this rock really protected this piece of organic fiber, which is pretty incredible. So honestly, I will forever remember this experience, not just for the artifacts or how much fun I had, but really like working with everybody together on this was an incredible experience for me. So the big takeaways from this project is community archaeology is a paradigm shift. It creates empathetic and multi-perspective interpretations. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is, the Jemez people got, their representatives got to look at the artifacts, decide if there was anything that was too culturally sensitive, and they got to, do their thing to put the artifacts back in the earth, or whatever that they wanted to do with that. And that's an important thing too, because people can make the argument that, oh, we need scientific data, but honestly there can be a compromise there. We were able to photograph, to measure artifacts, and then give them back, which is an incredibly important part. The village could have been abandoned multiple times throughout the Isleta's history, is one thing we learned. And acculturation took many forms and was represented in pottery and animal remains found in this room. So the actual lecture behind this goes into what acculturation is, and really it's, how the groups affect one another between the Spanish and indigenous people, how those artifacts show that merging of cultures. And this room had unique items and features that are not common in pueblos and not found anywhere in the village of Picuris. It was much larger than other rooms. It had a niche in the walls, and it had objects of cultural importance and significance. So that was some of the big takeaways that I know of. I'm sure if anything else has come up with further analysis, that Matt can answer those questions. Due to this project, I was inspired to do a similar project with Friends of Coronado members and grad students called Dig Historia. And so Dig Historia was my master's project and master's paper, and hopefully we're looking at a December, like I said, graduation. So we're going to get this all written up and finalized, finally. And so this project is a little different because we had a greater amount of terrain to cover, and it was really important to me that everybody got to participate in multiple areas of archaeology. Because another stereotype is that archaeologists just excavate, they just dig. I mean, my family member, how many times, oh, what are you digging now? What are you digging now? And that is not all we do. And in fact, that is really, I mean, it kind of depends on your career route, but excavation is not, I would say, like the majority of what we do as archaeologists. I would say probably the majority is survey, at least the majority that I have done. And so we lined up, so many meters apart, and we headed out into the desert looking for everything. And you can see in that bottom photo how many artifacts are out there. You guys know this. You guys have walked along Coronado and the trails back there. There are artifacts everywhere. And so we did that survey, we flagged the artifacts, and then people were able to recognize site boundaries from this. That's another thing that people ask a lot is, oh, how do you determine how big the site is or whatever? And one method is just to see the extent of the artifacts. And you can just see these flags, and it makes that kind of rounded area there. And so that is something that we could consider a site. So we had the volunteers that were out there do that. We had them draw it out and see what that is. I also wanted people to make decisions where to excavate, because that's another thing that is a little mysterious, is how do you choose where to excavate? And so I let everybody else kind of make those decisions. Ultimately, I kind of had the final word of like, oh, well, maybe actually let's go over here, or maybe we want to try one on the slope and one on the ground and see if there's any differences. But ultimately, people did an awesome job in choosing spaces to excavate. Boop, 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 gotta move you again. Okay, and then why did we excavate there? In these photos, you can see, if you squint, you can see some of the artifacts there. So on the photo to the left, Just left of the pink flag is a piece of red, and that is a piece of a spindle whorl. And so with archaeology, it's hard to know where that artifact originated. If, you know, there's a lot of processes that happen on the earth. Rain can move things, and erosion and sandstorms and all this stuff can happen. But it's somewhere to start. You know, you see this artifact, like, all right, let's put a unit right here and see what we're doing. So that was a lot of what this project was using these testing units. So they're really small, 1 by 1 meters, to try and find sites and try and find evidence of subsurface deposits, so things buried beneath the surface. People also got to learn how to document surface artifacts. And so here are some of the historic artifacts that we have found. The upper left is a can that just had a bunch of puncture holes in it. And that's always really fun to ask people what they think it is. I mean, we have had like a salt and pepper shaker, or like a shower head, you know, or my favorite is, you know, someone's bored. Someone was just out there popping holes in it because they were bored. And so it's kind of fun to hear these interpretations, because that is a lot of archaeology, is a lot of guesswork and, you know, using the context and trying to figure out what's going on out there. And so we had some old cans, we had a lot of old metal, which was a lot of fun, and people got to learn. One of my friends, Cassie Keys, she just graduated with her master's. She was out there teaching people how to recognize lithics and those materials, and hopefully some of this, you know, stuck with people, and people can recognize them wherever they go. And then excavate. We got to excavate, and we got to do a lot of what I like to call archaeology yoga. I feel pretty bad for some of our volunteers that had to lay completely flat in order to reach inside these tiny holes. But I think everybody was really positive and had a great time out there. Here are some photos that demonstrate archaeology yoga. Not so great for your knees, but, you know, good stretches, good for the back. So there's that. That's always a really fun part, because as you know, as you guys will be told over and over again, is don't collapse the walls. Don't collapse the walls. Incredibly important, which it is. So that is why we do all of these fancy poses, to try and not collapse our walls. People screamed. And, you know, people have a lot of opinions about screening. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Some people think it's a lot of work. I love screening. I think it is so fun to, like, see what's popping out. But I always encourage people that were screening to bring artifacts back to the excavators and show them what they found, so that people aren't just feeling like they're digging endlessly. So it's always important to kind of communicate that. It's like, hey, no, you're doing good work. You're actually finding stuff. That's great. But, you know, in archaeology, we don't always find things, right? So sometimes you end up digging, how big was that? A 2 meter by 2 meter square hole, a meter into the ground, and find nothing. That happened to me in the Ajo heat of 120 degrees. And that is something that is a part of archaeology. You know, it's like, something that I always like to say is, even on my worst days, I still have good stories. Right. So on the worst days in archaeology, it still makes great stories to tell people. So gotta love what you do, right? And then take photos. Much to Matt's dismay, we have a lot of photos of every level, of every unit that we excavated, because I think it is an important part of archaeology to document this process, no matter how annoying it is to track down the board and change all the little letters. And something we remember is, like, pictures don't take up space, really. It's digital now. Archaeology is a destructive science, and we are not getting this back. We are never going to have these artifacts in the same places ever again. So photos are a really important way of documenting that. Filling out forms, another favorite thing to do. And so we had different level forms for every single level of 10 centimeters that we excavated. People had to fill out the form, say what they found. And again, like I said, incredibly important to document this stuff, even as just a public archaeology thing, or like a field school or anything. It is so important, because again, this information is lost once it leaves the ground. So document, document, document. And then we had lab work, and there is some of our wonderful volunteers doing some lab work. We did the same thing that James did. We set up the lab in a public space, and so we could answer people's questions and clean those artifacts in the public view. So all of it, this whole process is as accessible as possible. And so what were we out there looking for? So the Santa Fe Northwestern Railway was constructed between 1922 and 1923. It links the Gilman tunnels and, linked Gilman, the town, through the tunnels, and Jemez Springs to Bernalillo. It ran until about 1941, where it was damaged by flooding. And if you take a look at that picture, that is a massive bridge over the Rio Grande. So just like imagine the flood that it took to wipe out all of those pillars. That is a crazy flood. And so it was never rebuilt. It was too expensive to repair. And then World War II came along, and they're like, oh, we need this metal anyway from this railroad. So what really drove this project was an archaeologist named Snow in 1976 said that there was a small undesignated site several hundred yards north of Kuaua, which has been cut by an old railroad grade which crossed the river, and it might have belonged to Diego Montoya prior to the revolt or to his parents. And so that was kind of the driving factor behind this project, was really searching for evidence of this house, this hacienda. And so what ended up happening is we had to use a survey permit, and so we weren't able to do the big units that we wanted to. Again, another thing that happens in archaeology, as much as it was unfortunate that we didn't get to excavate these massive things, and we didn't get to bisect the railroad bed and all of that we wanted to do, it is important that these things are in place, because it prevents people from excavating unnecessarily and destroying information without regard. So as much as it kind of stunk for my project and like my volunteers, we were still able to get out there and excavate, and our work is still important. So we ended up finding different sites, and we threw in some test units for those sites to see what was beneath the surface. And so we had what we deemed the early site, because it consisted of artifacts that dated prior to like historic times. It was prehistoric artifacts and such. And as you can see, we hit riverbed cobbles in our excavations. But the crazy thing is artifacts were way down in there too. So obviously a lot of different processes happening there with the river and the sand moving those artifacts down into the ground. But we found on the right, you found just the base of a projectile point. It doesn't really help us too much because it doesn't give us like a good time period. To my understanding, I'm not very good at projectile points, but not very helpful, just having this little sliver, but still cool. We had the hacienda site, which is where we had expected to find the hacienda. It was below that railroad bed. We did find a piece of Maholica out there, and we found this massive piece of pottery, which I think is one of the best parts, or maybe not the best parts, but one of the coolest artifacts that we found was all of these pieces to this massive pot. And then you have the spindle world there. And then we have the railroad site, which was further on the railroad, that consisted all of historic artifacts, which you can see here, all of this metal. And then we had a piece of the ethnographic gardens, and the garden, if you go out there and you walk along the trail at Coronado, you can still see evidence of the walls of this garden. And so we wanted to take a look if there was anything that we could learn about it, when it was, well, we know when it was constructed, but if there's anything more that we can learn about the actual construction of this wall. And so here's a really old map before we had different sites, but you could see the green is where the railroad bed is. And if the green were to continue across the river, there's another piece over there. And then AC1 is what we deemed artifact concentration 1. That eventually became the hacienda site, because that is where we expected to find it. AC2, artifact concentration 2, was all historic artifacts. So that's pretty interesting that it's so separated, that AC1 was very much like Hispanic red pottery and all that kind of stuff, whereas AC2, or the railroad site, was all metal, so very much historic artifacts. AC3 ended up being the early site because it had those early artifacts. And then the red there is all part of the ethnographic gardens. We found a historic trash dump, which was really fun, with artifacts ranging in ages. And so what's next for that? We have to finish artifact analysis. As I said, ceramics is not my thing, so we really were hoping to get some volunteers interested and active on analyzing the ceramics from that. And then COVID happened. So that still in the future has to get done. Got to create maps, write up site forms, write a report, finish my master's paper. And so once all of this analysis gets done, we'll have more information. Sometimes archaeology is a slow process. In cultural resources management, it's a very fast process. It's like get out there, document, write the report, be done in many cases. So I am very happy and lucky that I have had the time that I have had to work on this report slowly and get it done right, especially with COVID and getting a full-time job while in grad school and all this crazy stuff that has happened. So I promise it'll get done. The survey report will get done. So hopefully sometime in the future, there could be more excavations and you're not waiting on me to write my report, right? And there's a nice picture of everybody, I think on the last day of excavations. So yeah, that is my spiel. I hope that, I held your interest for that long. Sorry, I just really talked at you. But hopefully you can tell that I am really passionate about that. And, hopefully we will have the opportunity to have more community and public archaeological projects at the historic sites. I know that we are really interested in getting some stuff done here at Los Luceros. Obviously, that's a pretty far drive for a lot of us. Believe me, I was doing the Albuquerque to Los Luceros drive twice a week for school, and it was not fun. But if you could make it up here for those projects when they happen, we would love to have you guys. I love the Friends of Coronado members. I think you guys are amazing, and I'm really happy to have had this opportunity. So now we'll do the actual part of this, which is Ask an Archaeologist. So hopefully I can answer any questions that you guys have. And if not, I think I saw Matt haunting this chat, so he can probably answer some questions too. The question was, what are some of the artifacts that were found at Dig Gisela that are uncommon in other pueblos?
Well, we're still doing analysis of the artifacts. So to say that we know everything at this point is still up in the air. But some of the ones that you guys would probably be most interested in are the colono wares, such as the candlestick holder made in Jemez black on white. Colono wares are atypical of what you find in most Pueblo sites. Those are European vessel forms of native ceramics. That's how we use the term in the American Southwest. Some of the projectile points were also fairly atypical. There was a fairly wide range of projectile points in the assemblage. We finished analysis in James Moore, there you go. You got some, Carly just posted some up there as far as some of the more interesting things that we kind of see. Other projectile points, a variety of projectile points. But as Carly mentioned in the talk, the most unusual thing was actually the room itself. Not only the size of the room, but the amount of material culture left behind in the room. At the time of abandonment. It suggests a really quick abandonment, but it also suggests that something bad happened. People usually don't walk away from all that stuff. And she's showing some of those slides here as far as different types of materials we see in the rooms.
All right, we have one other question. Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
My actual microphone is muted, not just the Zoom. Okay. There were a lot of rooms to choose from. I was this one in particular chosen to excavate, and that's also from Sherry.
Cool. So it was my understanding that excavations in the room next to it had taken place in decades prior. And so it was pretty easy to find this room. And then also, for the interpretive side of things, it's really accessible right off of the trail. And so people could see the excavation the whole time it was going on, but also eventually we'll be able to enter the room. Is there any more to add to that, Matt?
I think you got the main points. The other, I guess, important point to it is, first of all, yes, we did choose it because it was close to the trail and we knew we'd be able to interpret it very good. We also had seen excavations. We knew of excavations that happened in the 1960s. It showed really interesting data from the adjacent rooms, and we suspected to find the same thing. But going to that level, one of the debates Larry Hammock and Reggie Wiseman had about those earlier rooms in 1965 is what happened. So the rooms appeared to show materials laying on the floor like they were quickly abandoned, like people just walked away from those rooms. And they had a shouting match outside the site one day, and you lock things away in your head. And they were complaining about why they abandoned the rooms and when they abandoned the rooms based upon the material culture. Unfortunately, Jemez black on white, which you see in this picture Carly is showing right now, has a long period of manufacture, and it's not really easy to tell what time something specifically dates to. So the questions quickly became, did these rooms get abandoned during the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 or the Jemez Revolt of 1623? So there was a lot of things we could find out just by looking at that room and trying to answer some questions about whether the village burned in 1623 or 1680 and what that might reflect.
So I have one more question about the pottery. The black color for most of pottery is made with charcoal, right?
You're asking if the paint is carbon-based? It definitely is. Jemez black on white is. Other areas use mineral paints, but at this point, what you're seeing there, and you can actually, it's a really good example of carbon-based paints. So that soup plate that you're looking at right there, which is a clonoware, it looks kind of washed out if you look at it. That's pretty common when you use carbon paint. Carbon paint, it's not really charcoal. What it is it's plant matter. It can be charcoal, but it's usually a mixture of things using various substances to make it go. There's a lot of different ways you can actually make it go. It turns out when it fires, it gets that washy color. It's important to note that you're actually looking at two colors on that pot. So the pot itself, you took off all the decoration, it's actually a bright or dark red. And what you're seeing there is the first thing they applied is a white clay slip to the entire vessel. So they took a white clay after they were done making their pot out of red clay. And this is the signature characteristics of Jemez. They use the clays in the Jemez area are very, very red. But there are a couple locations where you can get this white clay or white slip. The main location, or the easiest location at Kisa, is just right up the canyon. But they take that and they cover the entire vessel. So even though it's a red vessel, they make it white. And then after that happens, then they go back with their yucca paintbrush, and they have some resin kind of sappy thing, we think, mixed with charcoal or reduced down to a specific plant. And Eric Blinman's better about talking about which plants they used to do. They reduce it down into like a black mass, and then they paint that on, and that's your carbon paint.
So is it possible to carbon date the paint on a vessel, or is it not enough?
Okay. So it actually is, and Eric's actually one of the ones pioneering. So Office of Archaeological Studies in Santa Fe is one of the groups trying to pioneer this now. They think they can. Usually you want a lot more carbon to get your sample, but there's a gas processor thinking they can extract a small sample from that. However, carbon dating is better in the prehistoric period than it is in the historic period. Once you start dealing with small amounts of dates and times in the historic period, carbon dating becomes less and less viable and accurate. There's a lot of overlapping dates. Mm-hmm. So carbon dating that pot probably would not get you a definitive date on what day the room burned. We did do some carbon dating from it, but it's one of those technologies that's getting better every day, more refined.
That's going to do it for the questions. So unless there's any other last minute questions, thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for lending me your ears.